let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Hi, and welcome to In the Clouds. I am your host, Stu Miniman. It is our first episode of 2026. Thank you so much for joining us. 2025, quite a year, a lot going on in the tech industry, and super excited. Last year, I had a number of episodes where I kind of joked, this show's been called In the Clouds, and I felt like we were talking a lot about AI. We talked a lot about virtualization, and a lot of it wasn't necessarily in the clouds. Now, of course, there's lots of discussion. Cloud is an operating model, not just a location. But to start out 2026, I've actually got a couple episodes where we'll talk a lot about public cloud. So really excited today. I've got somebody I've known in the community for a while. I got to see at a bunch of shows and is well known for his content. Sai Vennam, he's a principal solutions architect with AWS, who focuses on Kubernetes. Sai, thank you for joining me. Great to see you.
Hey, Stu. Excited to be here. Excited to be on this side of the camera as well. As you know, I've been in your seat a few times in the past, but
Sure.
yeah, excited to be here and talk about a little bit about what we've seen in 2025 and, going into 2026. A lot of excitement in the air, a lot of new technologies, lots of shifts in the industries. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, and absolutely. Sai, you and I crossed paths at some of the KubeCons, Amazon reInvent. As you said, you create a lot of content. I remember the first time I met you, I think it was at a reInvent. We're actually at a party that Red Hat and AWS had. And I was like, Sai, everybody at Red Hat knows you. And it's like, you're like, come on, Stu. And I grabbed a couple of Red Hats. And they're like, do you know who that is? And they're like, oh, it's the Lightboard guy, the one that does those awesome Lightboards. But I've seen you on some community podcasts too. So like you, I've done a lot more from this seat in the hosting than I have on the other side. So yeah, we flip the mic around and here we're going to have a conversation. So look, if you got a question for me, if you want to ask my opinion, I'm happy to go. And quick programming note, I've got AWS today, great partner, leader in the space. Another friend of mine that I bumped into at KubeCon, Bobby Allen from Google Cloud, going to have him on in 2 weeks. So of course at Red Hat, we work with all the clouds. We love all the places. But today we're going to focus a lot on AWS. So Sai, why don't we start with a little bit of background? I joined Red Hat a little over 5 years ago, I think right around the same time that you joined AWS. And before that, you were actually working on many of the technologies that I work on here because you were at IBM and believe you had some relationships with the OpenShift stuff. I know I went back and looked and I seen, OpenShift Commons and of course some of the open source community stuff that you'd worked on from IBM, and some of that, bridged into what you're doing in Amazon. So if you could just quick background as to what you work on, your passions and your role today.
Yeah, interestingly, Stu, I think we both made a shift around the same time. I've been at AWS a little under 5 years. Prior to that, about 8 years at IBM. And look, I feel kind of a kindred with all of my folks at Red Hat as well. Going through that coalescing IBM and Red Hat at the time, I worked very closely with folks at Red Hat as well. Having worked with containers in the cloud, and at the time, now here's a word that a lot of folks might not have heard in a while, IBM Bluemix, right? With our cloud based on Cloud Foundry, which, by the way, I just want to say, I still think Cloud Foundry was well ahead of its time. And then, of course, with Red Hat coming in, the shift to Kubernetes, a lot of the things around OCP, that's right, the OpenShift container platform, moving into the world of Kubernetes. And then, of course, now with my time here at AWS, really, seeing the community around containers and Kubernetes continue to strengthen. And now I work very closely with, of course, AWS, our Kubernetes solution, Amazon EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. So lots for us to talk about today. I know a lot has shifted, and I feel like we'll have a lot of common things that we can talk about considering kind of my background in IBM and kind of how close we were with Red Hat and all of that.
Yeah, Sai, when I was looking back at some of your work over time, you had a term that I'd not really heard, and it was Kubernetifying things. I've been watching this trend since the early days. I was even at like the DockerCon when Kubernetes got announced and everything. When I watched the Kubernetes documentary, I'm like looking at all the video to see if I'm seen in the background, because I'm like, oh, I've interviewed those people. I know those people. I've been at that conference. Obviously, we've celebrated a year ago, 10 years of Kubernetes. A lot has changed. I guess, bring us just kind of state of the state, containers, Kubernetes, this ecosystem. What did you see in 2025? What are some of the big changes that have happened, recently?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll even talk about kind of leading into 2025 and even, when I first started doing developer content and developer education, Kubernetes was really about moving fast and breaking things. It was velocity of features. It was really trying to entrench itself as, we've heard this before, the operating system of the cloud. And, 2025 marked, I think, a clear shift of it's not just about feature velocity and moving quickly. It's a lot about, stability and graduating into something more resilient that companies can rely on. The Cloud Computing Foundation, I pulled a number. It's over 230 projects now, 300,000 contributors. And we're in this kind of paradox of choice now, right? The same thing that made Kubernetes so strong, this choice of, pick the perfect tools for your requirements, has almost, I don't want to call it a curse, but it's become debilitating almost, of making sure you pick the right things. And now you have to not only consider, did I pick the right things, but will they continue to be maintained correctly? Will it support the latest versions of Kubernetes? Something we can talk about in a little bit is, I think burnout is at an all-time high. One of the things we saw in 2025 was the deprecation of the ingress module from Nginx. And that deprecation was, in my view, kind of a clear marker that burnout is a real issue. And maybe the open source community is taking advantage of a few maintainers for a little bit too long. And so it's a signal to a lot of companies that you kind of have to invest in the right capabilities, not just the ones with the fastest feature velocity, but the ones that are also going to be kind of maintained moving forward.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Sai. The paradox of choice is real. In the community, been around for 10 years, and many customers have been running Kubernetes for a while now. There's a lot of technical debt that's gotten built up, and something we always look at as to, like, right, when do you deprecate things? How do you take advantage of new technologies? A line I've used a lot watching this space is, it used to be, boy, I should have started that a year ago. But I didn't, so I'll start now. With the pace of change, especially, cloud native and AI. Oh my gosh, can I wait another 6 months? Because I'm not sure if I'm ready to start, and it seems like things are changing so fast. But most of the times we understand we need to start today, and you make a decision and you go, and you can't be like second guessing yourself. Oh wait, there's that new shiny thing. Your ultimate CEO, Andy Jassy, used to have one of the great lines is like, hey, when you're doing, these architectures, are you choosing one-way doors or two-way doors? Is this something that is just going to say, I go out this door and I can't ever make a change? And one of the things I really love about the cloud native ecosystem is most of it isn't building a rigid stack, but you talked about over 200 projects there. Most of those can be plugged in, and I can make them changes. And some of the times I will phase out one and add another. And other times, we're adding up. We don't want to have this giant tarball of what we have. It's funny. I thought about you. You mentioned Cloud Foundry, and there were a lot of interesting things about Cloud Foundry. It was kind of that PaaS era. It was very overly opinionated. And one of the things we're always balancing is like how opinionated and flexible. And one of the other technology trends, serverless, again, is like how small and flexible do we make things? And over the last bunch of years, we've seen a lot of blurring between the serverless world and the container world. So I'd love to get your viewpoint, especially since, if you talk serverless, Amazon, you are the leaders in this space. And it's not just Lambda, but it's Fargate, it's Knative, which we have with ROSA. I talked to Roland Barcy about this a bunch, who, like you, has IBM and Red Hat, IBM and Amazon connections. So what are you seeing in that space as to, the blurring of those lines?
Yeah. And like I said, I do think Cloud Foundry was ahead of its time. And when it was really growing, it was kind of aligned with things like the 12-factor app. And the reason I say ahead of its time is not because like cloud providers and customers alike didn't see the vision. I think we all saw the vision of an opinionated stack where you have microservices that are kind of managed for you, and you just deploy them, you give it a number of replicas, and you just let them handle the rest. The reason I say it was ahead of its time is because I think customers weren't quite ready with their workloads to move into platforms kind of like that. By the way, I say, at the same time, Heroku was getting really big as well, this fully kind of managed opinionated platforms. But customers weren't quite ready. Fast forward a little over a decade now, I think customers are ready now. That's really come from this popularization of containers and Docker and Kubernetes. And most customers, if they haven't already containerized, they're on a path to do that containerization right now. And so I think we're starting to see this return to more opinionated, more kind of hands-off platforms. We use a term here at AWS quite often, undifferentiated heavy lifting. This refers to all of the mundane tasks that operations teams need to do, the things that just kind of stack up, that maybe you don't really want to manage day to day. These include things like maybe upgrading the components that are vital to your Kubernetes cluster, your CNIs, your kube proxies, the different components that enable your applications to work, maybe load balancer controllers, like maybe the Nginx ingress controller, which you now have to migrate from because it's deprecated, right? These are the kind of things that we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. By the way, consider in a company, maybe there's 100 different teams that have been given the mandate that, hey, you build it, you run it. So now you have dev teams that are doing DevOps that have to do all of these tasks individually. Every single team having to manage these type of components. And so what we've seen is really a return to abstracting some of these things away. And I really want to talk about this at some point today, as well as is the shift that we saw in 2025 around platform engineering and going into 2026.
So you're jumping ahead of me, man. Yeah, look, no, I'm glad I'm interrupting you there, because I just want to platform engineering. You mentioned developer burnout. The term I feel like a couple of years ago that I heard all the time was that cognitive overload. And really, I felt when I was attending KubeCon like about 3 years ago, right before we had ChatGPT came out, it was like all this momentum building around this theme of platform engineering. And then the Gen AI wave hit, and it kind of pushed down some of the discussion and hype around platform engineering, but really feels like over the last year that's picked up some, not because it was hype, but it's because we have a real need, a real challenge, and real solutions that are helping us to get to that next generation of how do we manage, developers and operators after, well over a decade of kind of DevOps. So yeah, I'd love, Sai, let talk a little bit more about that, because platform engineering, it's real, it's exciting, and it solves some real issues that customers have really been struggling with, especially as they start going to scale on some of these environments.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It really does, I think, come back to top of mind. You're right about how when the Gen AI wave occurred, I think there was a lot of still uncertainty and doubt around what does this mean for the future of SREs, future of kind of Kubernetes. But one thing I'll just quickly say, Kubernetes has kind of cemented itself as the operating system for AI. For training models, for inference use cases, we're seeing Kubernetes be that scheduler for the capacity. Now, this kind of putting that to the side a little bit, that uncertainty and doubt around platform engineering, the reason why we think it's coming back, and it really does tie into that burnout being at an all-time high. The reason why we see platform engineering come back is because of this concept of a paved road. There was an analogy that I heard the other day about how we kind of forced our DevOps teams to move at a really rapid velocity, to run really fast, but we didn't give them the right shoes. So here they are running on gravel, the gravel being the infrastructure and all of the things that you can get tripped up on. And realistically, we can look at some of these platform engineering tools as the shoes that allow them to move as fast as they want to without getting tripped up on all the rocks, right? And I like that, and I like how AI is actually augmenting this experience as well. I think, I'm sure we could go on for an hour talking about AI alone, but just to kind of keep us a little focused on platform engineering, some of the things that we've seen come up in 2025, some of the things that AWS is working on, things like Crow, which allow you to abstract anything that's a custom resource definition and create a nice little box around it. Things like Backstage, these internal developer platforms that allow central cloud excellency teams within companies to establish a pattern and then let all of the application teams spin up that established pattern. These are the kind of waves that we're seeing. There's actually a term here that I learned from a Red Hat blog a while ago, shadow IT. Now it's a lot more common to hear this around, but this notion that app teams were just picking the solutions that they liked and running them, and then eventually a company is using 4 different cloud providers, 18 different platform engineering tools, and all of these different capabilities, and the direction of maintaining them starts to get a little bit muddy. And so I think 2025, this wave of platform engineering, this concept of IDPs, this concept of a paved road, is bringing all that back together to help alleviate some of that cognitive load, like you said.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Shadow IT is a term that came up in the early days of cloud, and you're sitting at the company that we usually talked about from Shadow IT, because it used to be, I have a challenge, I go to IT, and they tell me the answer's no, or it's going to take me too long, and all I would do is pull up my credit card, go to Amazon, swipe a card, and I would just do that. I used to speak at conferences, and I'd be like, okay, how many of you raise your hands if you're using Amazon? And half the room would go up, and I'm like, okay, if I did an IP search for your company, would I find you on Amazon? And everybody's like, yeah, probably, things like that. So, Amazon was like the original, destination for Shadow IT. But yeah, no, platform engineering is so exciting. As I said, you and I will be at KubeCon Amsterdam. It's one of the day zero events that, we at Red Hat and the community in general spend a lot of time on. And it's really interesting because it's, Sai, you wonder sometimes, you talked about undifferentiated heavy lifting. Come on, cloud was supposed to be easy. It was cheap. I shouldn't have these things. But like, I can do really amazing things in the cloud. And I've got, we talked about over 200 projects in the CNCF. How many services are on Amazon? A few hundred. How many, offerings are in the marketplace? Thousands. So how do I, as a company, get my best practices in place, get different orgs to understand what tools are allowed, get involved in those golden paths? That's where platform engineering, can help a ton. Yeah. And
Yeah.
And I feel too, it's one of those, there's certain base technologies, if I don't take advantage of them, if I haven't started down a containerization journey and modernized my apps, if I'm not using automation, if I'm not looking at platform engineering and tools like that, how do you think you're going to be able to take advantage of AI and scale that through your organization and have, governance, security, and all the things that you have? So, let's talk about AI a little bit, Sai. Do you ever make any jokes? You've got AI right in your first name, but that's
I've never considered that.
No?
I think, Stu, you're the very first person to raise that to me.
Yeah.
I think you gave me an idea for a new YouTube channel name. I'm
It's
gonna
a
run
new
with
YouTube
this.
channel. Let kind of hype versus production. Where are the developers that you're talking to, the customers that you're talking to? Give us a little bit. I didn't go to reInvent this last year. What was the vibe there when it came to the AI discussion?
Yeah, and look, I want to just address something that I know is top of developers' minds, top of really anyone in the world right now, is this notion that, hey, will AI make my job obsolete? And look, this is going to be a little controversial, and I'm taking a page out of the book from the keynote that Werner Vogels did at reInvent this year, or rather end of last year. Will it make your job obsolete? Possibly. But will it make you obsolete as a person that's leveraging AI tools? Absolutely not. And I think the notion there is you kind of have to evolve to leverage these solutions. There will always be shifts in the industry that make certain job roles or capabilities less required, or potentially, using the really strong word, obsolete, right? And AI is not the first time we've seen this happen. I think back in the 60s, of course, when we started, with COBOL and mainframe programming languages, moving away from assembly, people thought, hey, anyone can code now. You don't need someone that can write assembly, right? And there was a fear that jobs would be removed. And we see that every decade of some new technology comes and we think, hey, this is going to remove jobs. And realistically, look, we have been drowning in a backlog of features we want to deploy. There's never been a time where we're like, you know what, we're good. We don't think we have anything else to deploy on this capability. And really, I think that's where AI is coming in to help us improve this velocity. And I think I want to address this because I know it's top of mind for so many folks of, is this going to remove my job? And I think it's going to evolve. It's going to evolve your roles. And I think we've already seen this happening where we can move at a faster velocity, and we can kind of treat AI as more like a complementary tool that's helping us move forward, rather than something that's potentially reducing our ability to contribute effectively in a company, right? And so I'm personally, cautiously optimistic, looking towards the future. I think there's going to be a lot of shifts in the industry for sure, but at the end of the day, it's nothing different compared to what we've seen in the past. What do you think, Stu?
Yeah, Sai. First of all, it was what a seminal moment. Werner's last keynote. I got to attend a number of them. Great guy. Had an opportunity to talk to him a few times at some of the reInvents that I've been to over the years. And yeah, look, Jensen from NVIDIA says, look, AI isn't going to take your job. Somebody using AI could take your job. The joke I've heard is, yeah, somebody using AI is going to take your job and 100 others if you don't take advantage of this stuff. So you and I think both come with that technologist lens, which is, I look at technology and I want to take advantage of that and help how it will help me, help my company, help the community for what we're doing. There's plenty of other waves I've seen over my career. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, hey, the early days of the web browser and the internet and stuff. I was showing all these people, and in the early days, it was I don't know what this can do. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to change everything. And of course it did. And AI is the biggest since that wave that I've seen in my career. One that, I and my team are leveraging and using it where we can. We're all of us in the tech industry are figuring out how to add it into our products. And it's interesting because from my analyst days, people think that a technology like this comes out and you're like, oh, overnight. We're a little over 3 years since that Gen AI moment. And some people are like, oh, by now it should have had huge ripple effects. And in 2025, we saw quite a number of layoffs from, many in the tech industry. But we are still in the early innings of what AI is going to do. We're starting to find some great productivity use cases. We've got lots of people using it. there's almost nowhere that I go that I don't see people like on their phones leveraging some of these tools. Yeah, it's something that, you know, my big question last year, Sai, when I do these rapid fires at the end, was like, hey, how are you using AI in your personal life? Because a lot of times that will be an early look as to like what that ripple effect's going to be in business. And, you know, I think we're well down that path. And a lot of people have done it. The thing I've said, it's one of those first technology trends that like, wait, at like when I get together with a bunch of family, we can actually talk about that. And whether they like it or use it or don't like it or things like that, they actually know it, as opposed to for years, like I remember working on cloud computing in the early days, and it was like, they're like, do I know or care about that? I'm like, well, it's in the background and runs all of those services that you use, but they didn't touch the cloud. And AI is something that they're all touching. So yeah, that's my take.
You're absolutely right, and it actually marks something that I've noticed as a shift in 2025 as well. I think when that first Gen AI wave occurred and the first couple years, 2023, 2024, we saw that primary interface of working with AI being a chatbot. Text in, text out. You kind of had to do the heavy lifting of providing the right context and all of that. And then we saw MCP. And I remember this because at the end of 2024, I had done a talk at reInvent, live coding, showing how to set up a RAG pipeline, right? Like retrieval augmented generation, of how you can have a chatbot go retrieve data on your behalf and then use that to augment your initial prompt. And at the time, we had to build a lot of things from scratch. We weren't using MCP. We had to set up API calls and kind of multiple LLM requests in sequence to be able to do this. And then in 2025, we kind of put that behind us and we said, look, now we have MCP, and more critically, we have agents. One thing I'll tell you, Stu, about the way that I use AI, you know, I know you mentioned it's a rapid fire question, but I'll just tell you how I've been using it. 2024, I was using it as a chatbot. I had my favorite ones with my favorite models like Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and I was just giving it all the data that I wanted it to know, and it gave me a response back. Now I pretty much solely use agents. I also use it primarily through an IDE now. And the reason is because I want it to keep running until it figures out the answer. I don't want to have to do this back and forth. And when you use an IDE, it tends to do this thing where anything repeatable, it'll make a script for, so you can use it in the future. Any MCPs I have set up with security, with credentials on my local machine, it's able to leverage those MCPs to get context. And then, you know, going back to that talk I did in 2024, we did a similar version of that talk in 2025. And within the first 10 minutes, we were able to set up live coding the entire demo from 2024. That immediately shows you how much the industry has accelerated, how much easier it is to do these things like retrieval augmented generation. And then we spent the remaining 50 minutes essentially expanding on the agent even more, connecting more forms of context, allowing it to live API call data from Kubernetes clusters, and then finally, how we turn it into a real teammate. So someone that sits in your Slack channel, listening to issues that might pop up, deciding if it needs to respond, and then responding to you. And I think that's the shift that we saw in 2025 of moving away from this tool that helps individual developers going and talking to a chatbot to an agent that kind of lives like a teammate. And the notion of what we built, just to quickly cover that, it's an agent that sits in an engineering Slack channel, and it's listening to everything that's happening. And sometimes engineers talk about, oh, I decided to use this version because that version was broken. And it'll be like, hey, that's interesting. Let me store that. And maybe in the future, it'll come back as something useful. And it's this concept of tribal knowledge. And then the agent later on, if someone runs into that issue, it'll remember that it stored something about that and bring it back up. And I think there's the big thing we're going to start seeing in 2026 is companies leveraging AI as not just like this one-off chatbot, but kind of like a teammate. you put the guardrails around it. If an AI agent makes a PR, you give it the same PR code review that you would a junior employee that just submitted some code. It's this concept of giving it a secure identity, making sure it doesn't have access to more things than it needs to, and also interfacing with it in a way that's more natural, right? Like it just lives in your Slack, or maybe it responds to maybe particular emails you send out or things like that. And I think that's a big thing we're going to start seeing. Sorry, I know I went all over the place.
No. It's great. And I've been reading a bunch of articles lately about that move from considering a tool where I just ask a question to that maturation of an agent to act as a coworker or a teammate, and how does that role work? And a lot of questions about, you asked about that concern about, hey, what's happening in my job? It's like, hey, who's responsible for managing that? And, do you give feedback and reviews to, the virtual coworker versus, the people, and, how do we manage that? Hey, before we get to the rapid fire question, Sai, since you're at reInvent, I didn't get to go. You've got a lot of background with what we did at Red Hat. Probably around the time you joined Amazon is when we launched Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS, or ROSA. One of the first episodes I had was Deepak for In the Clouds, who was the general manager of all the container solutions back then when I started. So could you, if you don't mind, give us the update? How we doing? How's the partnership? How what are you hearing from customers that are using ROSA? Which I look at and I talk to customers, it's that SRE team that works on a jointly developed, jointly supported solution, takes a lot of that undifferentiated heavy lifting and allows our SREs to be able to manage that. Just the quick summary in case people don't know ROSA. Yeah,
definitely. So Red Hat OpenShift on AWS, ROSA has a nice little moniker there. And actually, when I first joined AWS from IBM, I joined the partner team that worked very closely with IBM and Red Hat. So I got the pleasure of working really closely with some of my favorite folks at Red Hat and IBM as well. And at the time, I even made a video. I think you could find it if you just search what is Red Hat OpenShift on AWS? What is ROSA? And I have one of my Lightboard videos covering it. And look, the platform itself has matured quite a bit. What we're seeing from customers is that this kind of intentional shift from a pure on-prem strategy where OpenShift is very much dominant as a solution for customers to be able to run Kubernetes on premises, and adding cloud, and especially with AI use cases requiring the ability to burst into the cloud to leverage accelerated computing. We're starting to see that the model makes a lot of sense. And for these customers, moving into a cloud provider can be challenging. And I think ROSA helps bridge that gap very nicely of, hey, you're leveraging OpenShift, you're running Kubernetes on premises, and now here's this kind of managed approach where you can kind of leverage a cloud provider while kind of maintaining this hybrid set of capabilities. Now, I think there's a lot of changes and updates we're making to that ROSA experience as well. By the way, ROSA is one of the few kind of partner-based solutions on AWS that gets first-class citizen support, right? It's integrated into the console. You can go right into the AWS console, just like you would EKS. You can go into ROSA, create a cluster, right? It's got that first-class experience there. And recently, we also, I think, have two deployment models for OpenShift on AWS. There's a hosted control plane approach versus kind of a classic approach where you manage the control planes and the licensing there. I think one of the key benefits there with AWS is this flexibility of procurement and licensing. It's that cloud computing model. It's why customers want to move to cloud in the first place. So we've seen a lot of traction there. And I think it's right for customers who have a strong kind of tie-in with Red Hat, with OpenShift container platform.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sai. I know, God, it was almost 5 years ago. I remember being in the console, hitting refresh, and it showed up. And I took a screenshot of it. And for a couple of years, it was in like one of the presentations, because as you said, like there's thousands of solutions in the marketplace, including we have lots from Red Hat. There's very few not created and owned by Amazon that are in the console itself. It was like when you actually launched at Amazon, the file service with NetApp, that was another one that got in there. And what was awesome is when that launched, it was fully supported on ROSA because we just sit on EC2 and we leverage and use all of those services. Still one of the top questions I get from customers, like, oh, I'm in Amazon, I want to use all of these services. I'm like, oh, well, we're in Amazon too. And ROSA doesn't prevent you from using all of those services that you've got. So no, it's been awesome. The fun thing I found even is we've got, a significant amount of the customers are actually new to OpenShift when they're using ROSA. So it's just a great joint solution. We've done a lot of work between the teams to make that experience easy for customers. And just, again, Kubernetes isn't the easiest. The managed solution with a cloud provider like Amazon is like the easiest way to get not just Kubernetes, but all those other services like, GitOps and Service Mesh and the like that we offer with OpenShift are there and fully supported. So no, it's been a phenomenal partnership. It's always great to watch that growth.
Yeah, it's a paradox of choice that we were talking about before, right? Of many times, customers kind of just want to be told, look, here are solutions that will not only work for your use case, but you can be sure that we're going to maintain them moving forward. And that's becoming more and more of a question these days, I think. So it's, it hits that value add directly.
As we turn the page into 2026, I did change the page on the question we're going to ask. We'll see if one of the questions I ask will be a sticky one for 2026, but let's roll questions from a red hat. All right. So Sai, we talked 2026. I'm going to give you a free hour. And what I want you to do is do something to stimulate your mind that you like. Are you going to read a book? Are you going to listen to a podcast? Are you going to go work on some AI solution that you have or something else?
Okay, to stimulate my mind for 1 hour. Look, I think this is the first year that I would actually say I would lock in with an AI agent specifically in an IDE. And I'll tell you, I did this over break. The amount you can get done, not in a traditional chatbot like, ChatGPT, Gemini, Amazon, Kiro, whatever you might have here. I'm talking about an agent in an IDE. The one that I love using is Kiro, of course. It's the Amazon IDE, kind of has the kind of latest models built in. And I believe is one of the easiest ways to get started without having to put a credit card down if you want to use an agent in an IDE, and simply start prompting. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was get my finances in check over the holidays. And one of the things that I like doing is trading crypto and trading on a number of different stacks. And so what I did was I started talking to that agent and I said, look, I need to build a tracker app. I just want to see how my investments are doing. And by the end of the hour, I was able to get it to pull from 8 different APIs, pull all of my transactions. It built an app for me where I could track the flow of the finances over time. And hey, I'll tell you, the reason I started doing that is because I wanted it to analyze my kind of buying habits and wanted it to give me suggestions. So look, I'll have to let you know how it goes at the end of this year, Stu, but I've allocated a small amount of money and I'm just going to do whatever it tells me to do, and we'll see how it goes.
All right. Question number 2. Sai, mentioned at the top of the program, everybody knows you for your Lightboard. You also speak at conferences. You do other presentations. So when it comes to creating and presenting, what's your favorite of these? Lightboards, presenting at a conference, or something else that I didn't mention there?
I'll say my favorite in 2025 especially is going to be just getting in front of customers, especially speaking at a conference. I find that I think that I have stage fright of, leading up to the session itself. I get a little bit in my head of, am I going to be able to deliver? Do I remember all the things I want to talk about? and something happens where I get on stage and everything feels natural, and I love it. And I had the opportunity last year to speak at a few events, notably at reInvent, and had a great experience. And then, of course, afterwards, speaking to all the customers that kind of come to you and say, "Hey, we're doing exactly that. Can you help us? Can you follow up? Can we get in touch?" And I think that face-to-face has grown to be one of my favorites. If you asked me that question 3-4 years ago, I might say getting in front of the camera, recording a Lightboard video, but it's definitely shifted.
Yeah. Awesome. Speaking about 3 or 4 years ago, let's have a question on Kubernetes itself. What do you think's really been the biggest change in the last 5 years? I felt like last year I met with a lot of customers that might have started 5 years ago, and they haven't necessarily refreshed and kept up to date with it. So if you're meeting somebody that's either new to Kubernetes or has been in it for a bunch of years and hasn't kept up, what do you say to them in 2026?
Yeah, the biggest changes, I think, with Kubernetes is the amount that we've allowed to abstract away from kind of undifferentiated heavy lifting, that cognitive load of managing Kubernetes clusters. We made a number of things easier. Notably, last year, we announced something called Amazon EKS Auto Mode, which does exactly that, of allowing you to upgrade clusters more easily, managing some of the key dependencies in the cluster, things like Carpenter, kubeproxy, the CNI, will just handle for you. One of the things that we hear from customers time and time again is that cluster upgrades are hard. And so the big shift that we've seen is not only helping customers manage the control plane of Kubernetes, but now helping them manage the data plane. That's where their applications run. And really, it comes back to that same thing that we've been, as cloud providers, saying for over a decade. We want you to focus on writing applications, not managing compute. And the biggest shift that we've seen in Kubernetes is not only in the world of open source, of all the modules that have been released, but also kind of some of these cloud provider managed solutions like Auto Mode that help you manage these things as well. One more quick thing I'll add there is Carpenter, an open source capability that AWS initially released and now is kind of getting broad support from other cloud providers as well. And Carpenter essentially allows you to do cluster auto scaling without a lot of the overhead of trying to manage individual node groups and auto scaling groups and all of that. It's kind of a just-in-time node autoscaler. And we've seen that grow from this fun project that a few customers at AWS were using to now being kind of the de facto standard for cluster autoscaling for Kubernetes across a number of platforms, solutions, customers. Everyone's using it now.
Yep. I actually had a member of my team. I remember when Carpenter in its early days, we'd looked at it. And if I understand, like Carpenter support with ROSA, I believe is there. So absolutely great to see. We, of course, at Red Hat, were excited to see how Amazon has been contributing to open source along the way. Because at Red Hat, of course, the more people contributing to open source, the better. So we're always behind that. So thank you, Sai, for going through the Red Hat. I want to go back to the first question that you answered in there. Because one of the first conversations that you and I had in person was we're almost 45 minutes into this. We know only a couple of friends of ours or family members are hanging on this long. But the algorithms have been pushing people to shorter content. I've heard people recently even say, oh my gosh, I can't go read a 15-page paper, let alone, like read an actual book anymore. I've pushed back a little bit about that more recently. When we were getting ready for this, I told you, like, I've been off the Twitters for 2 years, and I feel like I'm reading a lot more long form. I still have things that I scroll through and go through Reels and TikToks and the like. So I see a balance there. What have you been seeing? How are you consuming? How are you creating in today's environment?
Yeah, look, I won't sit here and say that I hate the TikTokification of people's attention spans, of how folks can't really focus on things that are longer, because I don't really see that as the case. I think that Reels and TikToks and all of those YouTube shorts are actually a great way to get introduced to something new. And I think what it's doing, it's spurring a whole new generation of people that are really that really care about something that they might have learned on these platforms. I've always found it an art when someone can take a really complex topic and meaningfully explain it in a few sentences or in a short TikTok or whatever it might be. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that I have some of my favorite content creators, even for in the world of Kubernetes, that are able to take really long form content, and that would generally be long form content, and manage to explain it in maybe a minute. And it really is something that's awesome, but it can't stop there. And this is my urge to folks. If you learn about something cool on YouTube Shorts or TikTok or Reels or whatever it might be, take the next step to dive in. And that almost always comes with some form of longer form content. And I think that's why I embrace the new era of short form content. But I also don't see long form content going anywhere. It's that next eventual step after you're introduced to something new.
Yeah, Sai, I think we're simpatico on that. I've done plenty of short content. Heck, we'll be pulling some short content from this conversation we have. But again, like I might be able to give the value proposition of something like Carpenter, but to really understand how that works and how it does some of those things, I'm going to need to go watch that 15-minute explainer or go read some of the documentation to be able to do that. So as something to get my attention or get my interest or learn about something new, it's awesome. I love food and travel content there, and absolutely a short form 1 or 2 minute thing is really great. And by the way, those platforms, the Reels and the TikToks, some of them are getting to like, I don't even know what the limits are. Is it 5 or 10 minutes now? Because there's some, it's like, boy, I'm watching a short movie now. I didn't even realize that I was doing that on this platform. So we know the pendulum, swings from one way to the other. Sai, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I've got about 20 other topics I'd love to be able to go to, but I think we'll have to wait for another time or there. So I mentioned KubeCon Amsterdam that you're going to be at. Any other big events that you've got coming up, or things that people should watch to catch up with you in 2026?
Yeah, for sure. So AWS does summits all over the world. They're generally free events. Anyone can sign up for. Be sure to check out if you have AWS summits in your local geo to come see what we're up to. Of course, KubeCons, I'll be at both this year, and with Amsterdam coming up next. Definitely excited about that. And subscribe to Containers from the Couch. Shameless plug here, Stu, but check us out on YouTube. We talk all things containers and cloud capabilities on AWS. You'll catch some of my Lightboard videos there as well. Stu, appreciate the opportunity to come on the show, talk to folks about the cloud, to be on this side of the camera, to be in the hot seat. Fun experience for me. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. My pleasure, Sai. Great there. And as I said, I and lots of us from Red Hat will be at KubeCon Amsterdam in March. Registration for Red Hat Summit just opened within the last week. That's going to be May in Atlanta, which is where I bumped into Sai at KubeCon Atlanta to set this up. As I mentioned, in 2 weeks, I'll be back with Bobby Allen from Google Cloud. We've got lots of good episodes that we're working on. And as always, if you've got guests that I should have on, topics you'd like us to cover, please feel to reach out and let us know. But welcome again, 2026. Thank you, Sai, for joining. And thank you to everybody for joining us on your journey in the clouds.